I would like to introduce my business communication video about miscommunication in the workplace. To speak with me today on the subject is Mr. Trevor Noyes, the father of C. Canadian English culture and current economic manager at CEC. Welcome to Trevor, welcome to our interview.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here this morning.
Yeah, I have some questions. First, do you think that miscommunication is the most serious problem in the workplace?
Yes, I believe that miscommunication is a very serious issue in the workplace, and it can have a lot of unintended, unforeseen consequences that can be both very damaging to companies and relationships in the short and long term.
Yeah. So, what reasons do you think that contribute to miscommunication?
Well, I think there are several reasons that miscommunication becomes a problem. As companies grow and expand, they, in most cases, are only used to the current model that they're working with, and as they add people or layers of management, it becomes very difficult for them to increase their transparency or level of communication at that rate. As well, there's honesty. When you have a lot of employees, you have people who may not be honest with you or as a coworker or management or themselves. They may be afraid to say, I don't know, or I don't understand what you're saying. And they say, oh yeah, I understand, I know. And a lot of times they don't. And if they say they do, then certain expectations go with that. And when they're not honest with themselves or with their coworkers, this can be quite a big problem. As well as not understanding where other people they're working with are coming from. And this is the main problem of perception. And for example, at the CEC, you have the owner, Ms. Ching, her perception of what should be happening. You have the Human Resources Department and their perception of what should be happening. You have the academic team and their perception of what should be happening. The sales team and who is the main communication at the early stages of introduction to the customers, in this case the parents. You have the foreign teachers who are quite different culturally from most of their coworkers and customers. You have the quality control team who reports to parents, management, deals with TAs, sometimes teachers and students. So you have a lot of different layers. So a lot of miscommunication can be culturally related, as far as foreign teachers working with Vietnamese teachers and students. Definitely parents' perceptions can be quite different from the CEC management perception or the teacher's perception or the student's perception. You can get a report on the same teacher that he's both boring and exciting from the same class. So, having a lot of different layers adds to the problem. So it comes down to really understanding in business or CEC your market, who your students are, knowing your material well and being confident in what you're doing. And I know that at one point for sure we were really a leader and pushed the bar in education in Hanoi in the early days, and I know we're developing a lot of new programs right now and revamping some things, so we'll be a leader shortly again. And understanding how to be clear in your message so that a lot of these issues don't occur in the first place.
Yeah, so can you share the story that you experienced around miscommunication at CT?
Okay, well, I something recent is I've been receiving emails from a quality control team member for a few weeks now, asking to replace or fire a teacher, saying the feedback is very negative. He's boring, he only does the lesson, doesn't provide extra input to the class. His perception when I spoke to him was the TA doesn't like him. The TA has been changed in that class 3 times in the last 2 months, and it was one of his best classes. Now, because of the TA changing, it's one of the worst. He doesn't think the quality control person likes him, so he thinks there's personal issues. He thinks the way they're perceiving him isn't the way he truly is. He's being perceived as lazy. He's being perceived as unmotivated. But from his perception, he goes into the class after working all day, so he doesn't feel he's lazy, and he's excited to work here. He goes into the class and tries to communicate with the students, but there's 3 or 4 students in the class that don't listen and talk over him and be rude in Vietnamese. And he doesn't feel that he's being supported to stop them doing it. And so, he said after 5, 10, 15 minutes of trying to get what you're talking about across and them shouting over you or speaking in Vietnamese and being distracting to the rest of the class, he gives up and just teaches the book. So that's his perception. The people watching him say, he doesn't provide any extra input, he just teaches the book. He's thinking, why bother? They're not listening to me anyway, and no one's making them listen. So I give up. So perception of what is actually the case comes down to where I am in helping the Human Resources Department. And we have to balance out, I have to look for more quality control management people that he works with. I have to speak to the TAs that he works with. If there's no improvement still, and honestly there hasn't been. I've observed the class, his class twice, I believe. I don't see it. I think he's a good guy. I think he tries. I think he's frustrated, and I think he's tired. Young people don't necessarily take care of themselves, and people forget about the physical aspect of their job. Even when we're talking about it, we don't talk about that. We leave it out. And that's part of the communication. If I go into a situation and I walk into my classroom and it's a disaster, and there's kids running everywhere, and there's book bags strewn about randomly, and there's nothing going on, I'm like, wow, this can really change the next 3 hours of how I work in the classroom. But if I go in and there's no students there, and I can get everything organized the way I like, and I can set up the places and tell the kids when they come in, put your book bags there, put your stamp book here, and there can be a certain level of organization that becomes consistent class after class. It becomes a learned skill, because then the students themselves become more organized. Just like when we're working together, oftentimes the communication issue comes down to, you told me the problem. I talked to the person about the problem, and it didn't change. So then I'm getting feedback, there's still a problem. Now, either myself or another manager or the quality control person, again, now we have to go back to that person and say, hey, there's still a problem. This generally isn't received well, Yeah. And sometimes what happens is people who aren't confident let it, as we say, fester. They don't get back to the person right away because they're scared. I know personal examples of this. You're scared of the reaction. You don't want to deal with that reaction. And Asian culture overall is much more non-confrontational than Western culture in the first place. So this can become a very big issue in the workplace here. And suddenly it's been 3 or 4 days and then a couple of weeks, and there hasn't been anything. So then you have the teacher going, okay, well, I guess everything's okay. I haven't heard anything. No news is good news. And the QC going, it's still boring. Nothing's changing. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. And there's no communication going on. And then the QC's saying to themselves in the head, well, he's going to be upset. And he's going to think this. And then they become self-defeating. And they build up these worries. And I think worry is like praying for something that you don't want, you know. So the longer this goes and the longer there's negative self-talk, the bigger the problem becomes when it's actually not a big deal.
Yeah, so besides their understanding and listening, there are important reasons that contribute to miscommunication as about their communication itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you give some recommendation that we can apply for avoid miscommunication in workplace?
Yeah, first of all, be honest about your skill set to yourself. I mean, if you get a job and there's certain areas where you think, wow, I can't believe I got the job, then you know going in you have weaknesses. Identify them and fix them.
Yeah.
Okay, so that you're prepared. 2, listen to other people. Someone once said, no one ever listened themselves out of a job. You know, but I know people even at the CEC who've certainly talked themselves out of a job. Don't stop listening when the other person is continuing to talk to you. In other words, let things flow. Think about the overall content of what they're saying, but don't get hung up on one key word. And this is often a problem at the CEC because of the different English-speaking skill level amongst the staff.
Yeah.
For example, you know, when you bring a student who's upset to a staff and you give them instructions, and your perception is, okay, I've clearly spoken to what's going on, I've given them a bit of history of the situation, I've told them what I want them to communicate in Vietnamese to this person, but then it doesn't happen. And then you figure out, wow, they didn't understand anything I said because they don't speak English.
Yeah.
So, you know, understanding the other person's skill level so that you can phrase things correctly, making your questions clear can help a lot. But letting things flow and then thinking about what the person has said overall, including the key word that you would normally get hung up on, and then giving a well thought out response, and as the speaker in the conversation, giving the person the opportunity. You know, these skills are not taught anymore. The device has taken over, and more people are going to text their friends or coworkers or email them than speak directly to them. And we practice that, and we're becoming great at it. Unfortunately, what's being lost is the actual verbal visual communication, where you put the phone away and you talk to the person and see their body language, understand the eye contact and where they're coming from and why they're thinking about this in a completely different way than you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this concludes our interviews. Thank you for coming in to speak with me today. So I'm looking forward to speak with you in the future. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.